All right, thank you all for coming to today's presentation, Creating a Digitally Inclusive Library with Digital Navigators, brought to you by the Laconia Technology Section. I'm Mike Campagna, president of this year's Technology Section, and I'm very excited to welcome you today to hear from Shauna Edson. Shauna is the Technology and Digital Equity Manager at the Salt Lake City Public Library. She leads the library's digital inclusion initiative and works with library staff and community partners to create long-term digital inclusion programming in the communities the library's 8 locations serve. Shauna served as the project director for the City Library, National Digital Inclusion Alliance, and Urban Libraries Council Digital Navigator pilot project from December 2020 through July. Shauna, thanks so much for being here.
Great, thank you for that kind introduction, Mike. I'm so excited to be here today to talk about the Digital Navigator model and how we can use it to create more digitally equitable libraries. Like Mike said, I work with the Salt Lake City Public Library as a technology and digital equity manager. I've been with the City Library since 2016. I started as an N10 Digital Inclusion Fellow, which is an initiative that is still going today, and my role became permanent. I've been there since then. So today we're going to discuss an introduction to digital equity and digital inclusion, just to make sure we're all on the same page with definitions of what those mean. We'll talk about the Digital Navigator model, and as we talk through that model, I'll be using the Digital Navigator Toolkit as a reference for how we have defined that model for this project. Okay, so before I jump into talking about digital equity in the City Library, I'd like to know a little bit more about you and your library. So what is the age range for your digital learners? Children's, tweens, teens, young adults, adults, aging adults, all of those. So the poll should have just popped up for you to be able to fill out. It looks like the majority of folks are working with adults and aging adults. Great. A lot of the Digital Navigator work or the model is really geared towards adults. It can be adopted for young adults, teens, and tweens, but it's really focused on adults. All right. So the next thing I would like to know is, what do your digital learners want to learn? Are they focused on foundational skills such as email, navigating a website, workplace skills, social media, or more advanced things like the Adobe Suite or coding? All right, a lot of folks here said the foundational skills and a little bit of workplace skills. Okay, that's good to know. We had the majority of folks participating in our pilot project wanted support with foundational skills. So I think this model works really well for that, as well as workplace skills. So thank you for participating in those polls. So let's jump into definitions. I like to define digital equity as when everyone has access to technologies for learning, communication, work, and play, and they have the skills to know how to use it to fully participate in the digital world. The National Digital Inclusion Alliance defines the digital divide as the gap between those who have affordable access, skills, and support to effectively engage online and those who do not. As technology constantly evolves, the digital divide prevents equal participation and opportunity in all parts of life, and disproportionately affects people of color, Indigenous peoples, households with low incomes, people with disabilities, and people in rural areas and older adults. They define digital equity as a condition in which all individuals and communities have the information technology capacity needed for full participation in our society, democracy, and economy. And then digital inclusion refers to the activities necessary to ensure that all individuals and communities, including the most disadvantaged, have access to and use of information and communication technologies. So there's 5 elements to digital inclusion: affordable, robust internet service, internet-enabled devices that meet the needs of the user, access to digital literacy training, quality technical support, and applications and online content designed to enable and encourage self-sufficiency, participation, and collaboration. So digital inclusion must evolve as technology advances. So this work is really never done because technology is constantly advancing. And it requires intentional strategies and investments to reduce and eliminate historical, institutional, and structural barriers to access and use technology. So digital divide is the issue, digital equity is the goal, and digital inclusion is the work that we do to achieve the goal. So I'm going to give you some information about Salt Lake City and the City Library so you can better understand the communities we support in our organization. So the Salt Lake City Public Library serves just over 200,000 individuals. The library system has 8 locations, and contrary to popular belief, I don't know anybody that actually likes green Jell-O here in Utah. The City Library has public computers at all of our 8 locations, and we have creative labs with innovative technologies at 4 of those locations. Our computers are well utilized by the community. We had over 14,000 sessions on our public computers last month alone. There are only 2 other public computer labs in the city. So a lot of cities have lots of places for people to go to access public computers. We don't. It's really the library, and then the city itself has 2. And the City Library has been facilitating digital skill building courses for decades. We have more than 500 technology workshops a year. We also have a long history on outreach and community partners to further extend digital inclusion services to community members that may not be coming into our libraries. We have been providing one-on-one computer support for our patrons for a really long time. Staff had a hard time keeping up with the demand, so we reached out to our community to help support our patrons. We launched the Tech League volunteer program in November of 2016, and volunteers provided basic foundational computer support for patrons at our main library and some of our branches, as well as supporting community partner organizations, code clubs, and other events. We paused the Tech League volunteer project in 2020, but at that time there was an average of 20 volunteers providing around 80 service hours and assisting around 60 patrons a month. So we hope to start that project up again in 2023. So enter the coronavirus. Like many organizations, the Salt Lake City Public Library closed our libraries in March of 2020 in response to the coronavirus. At the time, we thought the shutdown would only last 2 weeks, which I think a lot of people thought. As it became apparent that the shutdown would last indefinitely, we knew we needed to support our community's digital equity needs. So the pandemic put a spotlight on the massive public need for trustworthy digital inclusion services and drew much needed attention to digital inequities. At the same time, the pandemic response shut down or severely reduced the ability of libraries and other community organizations to offer their existing digital inclusion programs and services. So this included all of our face-to-face training classes and workshops, our public access computer labs, and walk-in services. Online versions of these services were only available to people who already had a computer, internet, and knew how to use them. So the foundational digital equity work the City Library had been doing put us in a good position to explore new digital equity models at that time. So in collaboration with the NDIA and the Urban Library Council, the City Library was awarded a grant to help develop the Digital Navigator model and pilot project. We started working on the model in April of 2020, and the grant started in October of that year and ended in September 2021. So direct service ran from December 2020 to July of 2021. We only had 8 months of direct service for this pilot project. So the Digital Navigator program model furthers digital inclusion efforts to ensure that more individuals and communities, including the most disadvantaged, can access affordable broadband devices and opportunities for digital skills training needed for that full participation in the digital world. So Digital Navigators address the whole digital inclusion process, from home connectivity to devices and digital skill building. And with community members through repeated interactions. So as we had noted before, people were coming into our public computer labs to get help with digital skill building, but often those were just a one-time interaction. The difference with this Digital Navigator model is that it provided a way for community members to work with one person on an ongoing basis. So these hands-on guides are familiar with digital equity resources and can be volunteers or cross-trained staff who work at trusted community-based organizations, such as social service agencies, libraries, or healthcare organizations. Okay, Digital Navigators support patrons by meeting them where they are. They embody the support services that libraries already offer in the form of a staff member placed in a neighborhood, branch, or partner community-based organizations. They provide one-on-one technology support rather than one-time interactions. These continued interactions establish trust and provide a foundation for continuing education, which is a pillar of our public library services. And since public libraries are trusted anchor institutions, they make reliable places where people can go to work with. Digital navigators often come from the community they serve. This was really important for us in Salt Lake City, which makes them well positioned to understand and address the technology-related concerns of their fellow community members. Okay. So one thing we get asked often is, what types of skills are we looking for when we're hiring digital navigators? And I like to place a strong emphasis on communication, empathy, cultural sensitivity, since repeated interactions are expected, and the development of a trusted relationship between the digital navigator and the patron is critical. So we can often teach some of the technology skills necessary to do the job, but it's a lot harder to teach some of those soft skills. So the City Library adapted a baseline job description to meet the needs for our project. The NDIA has a published Digital Navigator job description on their website. We included Spanish language and non-English skills to reflect the communities that the project intended to serve, and also the cultural diversity of Salt Lake City. So Salt Lake City is a refugee receiving city. We have a lot of refugees in our community that have lots of different languages. So having language skills is very important for us here. And then we also adapted the job description for the community partners that we wanted to work with. There was an added emphasis on cultural aptitude and multilingual skills. So you can find those, like I said, on the National Digital Inclusion Alliance webpage, as well as links in the Digital Navigator Toolkit. So success for the project. The project had two main goals. The first goal was to create a digital navigator model for libraries and direct service that can be adapted for different communities across the country. And then we had direct service goals. The direct service goals were centered around supporting digital inclusion services in our focus communities by working with a minimum of 450 participants. And then we measured the success of those interactions by having the participants define their digital goals. So we did that through a combination of qualitative and quantitative information we gathered. And you can find these surveys all linked both in the Digital Navigator Toolkit as well as the National Digital Inclusion Alliance webpage. So when somebody called in, the first thing we did was we walked them through an intake survey, which asked some basic questions around the type of support that individual was looking for, as well as for them to state their digital access goal. So it could have been related to getting internet, getting a device, or digital skill building. So if they were looking for support with digital skills, we followed up with a digital skills assessment to get a baseline understanding of where that individual was in digital skills and the next steps we needed to take to help them reach their goal. And then we also had an exit survey when the digital navigator was finished working with that individual on the goal. They followed up by asking some exit questions. So we all have survey fatigue, and surveys are frustrating and hard to get people to do. So the way we did these surveys was we had the digital navigator ask the questions and fill out the survey rather than giving the survey to the individual to fill out on their own. We also sent out a follow-up survey to help us determine if there was any long-term impact, such as getting a job or any other major life changes to having worked with the digital navigator. And we also asked participants in our program if it was okay to share their stories to demonstrate stories of impact. So one of the first things and most important things for working on a digital navigator project is determining a focus community. And this is to better understand the community members that would most benefit from support of digital resources. It's really hard to have a program that's just open to the whole city, which is a city library. Of course, we serve the whole city, but through our marketing campaigns and other things, we worked with the National Digital Inclusion Alliance to research the state of digital equity in Salt Lake City. So a team with NDIA and the city library looked at census data, state data, local media to understand the rates of internet access, adoption, device access, and ownership in Salt Lake City. And we targeted the neighborhoods most in need. We focused on 3 specific neighborhoods for this project. These 3 neighborhoods have a strong culture of community support, and word of mouth is a a primary method of communication. There's also many trusted and heavily utilized community-based organizations serving residents in these areas. We knew that cooking and art are a large part of everyday culture, and most residents are familiar with smartphones and apps. There are also many bilingual and multilingual individuals in these communities and a high need for support in Spanish. So taking that information, we identified 3 community partners to help us with our project. We recognized that community partners played an essential role for us in reaching the project's focus communities. So we selected 3 essential community organizations who each had 1 full-time digital navigator, many of whom were bilingual in English and Spanish. So we determined the following qualifiers for community-based organizations to form a mutually beneficial partnership on this project. They needed to be a trusted organization with deep roots in these 3 neighborhoods. They needed to be currently offering bilingual or multilingual programs with a lens on digital equity, capacity to support a full-time digital navigator position, and a commitment to work remotely or in person with communities during the pandemic. That last one was probably the hardest. It was so challenging to make sure that folks had the resources and support that they needed to work during this time. This picture is actually not from either of those 3 community organizations. We've done a lot of work with the International Rescue Committee here in Salt Lake City. I didn't realize I chose the wrong picture until now, so sorry about that. Okay, so digital navigator training. Training for a digital navigator is tricky because they're in a position where we have no idea what types of questions they're going to be asked in this role. It can be anything from signing up for a telehealth appointment, getting an email address. We had folks wanting to attend online learning, church services that had moved online, communicating with friends and family. So it's really, really hard to be able to train somebody in all the areas that they might need to support individuals. So our training started with an introduction and discussion around the field of digital inclusion and how and why the Digital Navigator program came to be. It was important for participants to have a grounding framework for this work and the role it plays in the larger mission of the city library. So the goal was to define digital navigators as members of their own community. They are the people best suited to address the needs of their communities because they know their communities best and have a foundational level of trust since their organization is housed in the neighborhood serviced by the program. So this is library locations as well as community partner organizations. So the second primary topic of training was understanding learner needs. And that one was more interactive with role-playing. Role-playing through different scenarios and modeling is really the best way to help train folks in this role. We also orient the digital navigators to recognize their technology needs and gaps, as well as training continued into emphasizing the cultural aptitude and social services backbone of the program. we have a lot of people asking for support in utilizing social services. So while this isn't necessarily in the social services world, we do a lot of support work for that. Then we wrapped up the training with resource sharing and organizational onboarding through what it looks like to utilize and report and do all the things that we do inside of our organization. So getting the word out about your project and digital navigators can be really tricky. You can have a great project, but if people don't know about it, then it can be really hard to reach folks that aren't connected. So for this project, we worked really hard to create a marketing campaign that was centered around our 3 focus neighborhoods in Salt Lake City. All of the project materials were bilingual and supported with in-person communication and information sharing. So marketing has shifted to online spaces over the past several years. So it can be very challenging to raise awareness of services available to people that do not have access to technology or who choose not to participate in digital spaces. To reach individuals using non-digital methods, we created yard signs to be displayed at our branches and community-based organizations. You do need to check with your city ordinances around where you can place yard signs, because you can't just put them anywhere you want, which we learned. We created bookmarks to be distributed via our holds to go services while our locations were closed, and then on our service desks when they reopened. We did a door hanger and foot campaign to reach individual households in our focus communities. Social media, we knew a lot of folks in our focus communities had smartphones and regularly used Facebook and other social media platforms. So we did sponsored ads there as well. And then one thing we also knew about our community was the word of mouth is the strongest way to get the message out. So individuals in our focus audiences have strong networks. So getting the program out spread rapidly by word of mouth. We had people coming to us from CBOs that included food banks, counseling services, school districts. Our school district actually included our bookmarks in their free lunch program at the time. They were offering to go free lunch programs, and refugee service providers. Community members also learn about the program through conversations on public transportation while receiving medical treatments. Somebody let us know they were getting dialysis, and the person sitting next to them told them about it, and other gathering spaces. So never underestimate getting word of mouth out there and making sure all those support community-based organizations know about your project. Okay, so there are a lot of favorite things, but one of my favorite things about this pilot project was getting out in the community. So library staff walked over 200 miles in our focus communities, handing out our door hangers and talking to residents about the Digital Navigator project. Everyone was so happy to see library staff out in their neighborhoods and connect with us during this time. So this little blurb here, I'm not going to read it. Sorry, it's a little challenging to read. I should have chosen better colors. But some folks needed help with their voicemail and setting up a password And our staff were able to help them right then and there on their front porch. This isn't something we normally do, but while we were closed down during the pandemic, it was so great to be able to meet people right where they were and connect with individuals. We also noticed during our foot campaign that when talking to folks, they would initially say they weren't interested in the program or didn't need the program, and we'd be halfway down the block and then they'd come like, wait, I changed my mind. Can you tell me more about that? So it was really great to actually talk to people so they can see us as staff and start building that relationship that way. Okay. We had a call-in number for this project, which we have since phased out of. The call-in number was our main library phone number. So we trained all of our call center staff to be able to fill out the intake form with folks when they called in. This method worked really well for us at this time. The intake form then auto-populated in the software that we use to manage our project, which was monday.com. And then from there, the project manager would review new intake forms and assign the community member to a digital navigator that could best support them. So if there were language needs there, or a specific type of skill that we knew a digital navigator was really strong in, we would connect that person to the digital navigator. And then our software would automatically notify the digital navigator of the assignment, and the digital navigator would reach out to the community member to schedule an appointment. Since we reopened our buildings, the amount of folks calling in dropped so much. People wanted to be in person, and it was really challenging to keep all of the call center staff fully trained in how to do this. So we've since stopped promoting our call-in number. Obviously, it's our main library phone number, so if people call in asking for it, they direct those folks to the appropriate department. But if you are in an area that is more rural and there's a lot more remote people, a call-in number is really a great way to manage the model. Foot traffic method, if somebody came in person, once our buildings open, a few of our community-based organizations stayed open through the pandemic. So they were able to take foot traffic in. So you talk to somebody at the front desk, and that person would either direct them to the call-in number or assist that person in filling out the intake form. And then the rest of the process would be the same. So one of the things we really wanted to focus on with this model is being able to provide both remote and in-person services and easily switch between the two, because this was still in 2020 and we had no idea what the future was going to look like. Okay, so a day in the life of a digital navigator. All of our digital navigators that worked for the city library worked remotely. Some of the digital navigators that worked with our community partner organizations worked in person. But the basic expectations for a day in the life of a digital navigator was checking in on new intake forms, checking email, following up with participants as necessary, and scheduling appointments. We had a lot of folks who were able to, they found that texting was the best way to schedule appointments. Like, people wouldn't answer their phone, but texting worked really well. And sometimes they were able to fully support somebody all through text, which was which was interesting. And then attending meetings. We have regularly weekly meetings. We still do that at the city library with our staff doing this work. A lot of those meetings are sharing out resources and problem solving together. We get a lot of things where we're just unsure on the best way to support folks and having additional resources available in the future if that question ever comes up again. We actually have a working document where we keep updated resources. If we need to do a soft handoff from a participant to another organization that can better support their needs, we have those resources available. Doing reporting, and then our digital navigators, because part of the project was to share this model out, they did a lot of time working on blogs and webinars and panels and things like that. And we also really emphasized self-care for our digital navigators, learning to set boundaries when working with individuals. We can't do everything for everybody, and it can be really challenging and hard for folks to have to tell people that, you know, we can't solve that problem for them. We do the best that we can to find a resource to direct them to. So learning to be able to do that and take care of yourself. We encouraged folks to take walk breaks, especially people working from home, or just they don't go for a walk, just giving themselves a break, being proactive about what you need. So asking for the resources and support that you need to be able to do your job, and then taking time for professional development. So continually learning and engaging with the broader community of folks doing this type of work. It can feel overwhelming and isolating at times. So really having a cohort of folks that you're working with that you can communicate regularly with goes a long way. So how did the pilot project go? Some of the things that we were surprised by was that only 7% of folks who reached out to us for home connectivity, which is home broadband. We expected it to be a much larger percentage of people that would be their first contact point. But Salt Lake City is a relatively highly connected city, and I think a lot of the folks that don't have broadband in their homes, there's reasons for that. They're in transition, so a hotspot works a lot better, or they're unhoused, or they might be in an apartment building where they can't get connected. We had some folks in mobile home communities and trailer park communities where they didn't have connectivity options, so having a hotspot for those folks was important as well. We were really surprised that 73% of folks that reached out to us needed a computer. We didn't realize device access was such a high need in our focus communities. Only 8% of people initially reached out to us for help with digital skills, but we found that once people had the connectivity and the computer, then they would start following up with their digital navigator. I'm like, okay, how do I do this? Now I need to know how to use it. So while initially the digital skills was lower on our list, it quickly moved up higher as we continued working with that individual. And lessons learned. So one of the biggest things we learned that was that ongoing support and relationships matter. Oops, sorry about that. Digital navigators serve as a type of technology caseworker to help people find solutions to their internet and technology needs. Many people struggle to find adequate resources to keep up with life demands and are often not aware of how learning digital literacy skills can make their life easier. Digital navigators, because they are trusted to their community, people feel comfortable reaching out from a vulnerable place for help and will come back with additional inquiries if they feel supported. But that support piece and trust is so important. So our data showed that 75% of digital navigator interactions take 15 minutes or more. So that was something that we realized the sessions were a little longer. The majority of the sessions were a little longer than we thought. We thought perhaps there were some things that could be done much quicker, but giving digital navigators the time to be able to work with people in a direct and sustained interaction was very important. We also learned that digital skills for using a smartphone are not the same as digital skills for using a laptop. And what I mean by this is that, so one of our community partner organizations, 85% of folks working with that organization were running small businesses on their smartphones. So it's really challenging to run a whole business on a smartphone. So when we offered those individuals a Chromebook or a laptop or a home computer, they were just, oh, I don't know how to do that. Like, I don't know how to use any of it. And then once we showed them that they can still how to check their email and how to use Google Calendar and how to use the same apps on the desktop version, they advanced really quickly. But there was a big gap between the perception that they could use a laptop. So that was something we were surprised by. And then remote services reach individuals who are not able to access in-person services. That was pretty obvious, but we were surprised to learn how many folks, while much less than when our buildings were closed, how many folks still request remote services. There's all sorts of barriers to coming into libraries or community organizations. So still being able to offer some form of remote services is essential. And then working with our community-based organizations. So many people were like, oh, I didn't know the library did this and had all these resources. So we really were surprised by how many people signed up for library cards and were really became regular library users through the work with community-based organizations. So ongoing digital navigator services at the city library, we have decided to drop the term digital navigator. The reason we did that is because during this grant period, we had a lot of folks who attached the name Digital Navigator to getting a free device because we were able to distribute devices to folks during that time. We also recognize the library is not the best place to distribute free devices because we can't collect a lot of data about individuals and do some of the vetting that other organizations are able to do. So we didn't want our community to view us in the role of distributing devices. But we do have staff who have since been trained as doing all of the digital navigator work. Our main library has a whole department for technology and digital access in our locations, and all of the staff there are trained to provide that one-on-one support and help folks connect to free or low-cost internet and devices in our community. Okay, so that's where we are today. And with that, I would love to talk a lot. love to hear any questions about how this project went. If you plan on doing a digital navigator project, do you have questions about setting that up? You can go ahead and put them in the chat, or I'm happy to, I think, Mike, can folks unmute themselves and ask a question too?
Yeah, I think they should be able to. If you can unmute, if not, I can also unmute you in the from my end. So feel free to ask questions in any format you'd like. And while we wait for other questions, I'm just going to kick us off. Maybe you talked a little bit about dropping the digital navigator term in the model, and I'm just curious. From the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, that digital navigator model that I dropped in the chat, was that associated with the distribution of the devices, or was it just the grant you all applied for?
It was the grant we applied for.
Okay, so it's not, so you could still potentially follow the digital navigators model, but it wouldn't be a requisite that you would distribute free devices.
Right, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so we
Cool.
pretty much follow the model, much more in person than remotely, but we still can take phone calls and work with people remotely. But we've really just rolled it into the workflow for our staff. There are a lot of communities and cities, especially larger cities, have device refurbishers who are always really excited to partner with libraries. So libraries will provide the digital literacy training, and those other organizations will provide and distribute devices. In the past, we've worked with PCs for People on that here, and that's a really great way to get folks devices without the library taking on that direct role.
All right, so Bari says, can you share more about determining whether the greatest digital access or learning needs are in a community?
Yeah. So the American Community Surveys in 2020 released data. It's probably the most up-to-date data that you will be able to find for your community. And then the FCC is currently working on broadband maps as part of the Digital Equity Act and the IIJA and the BEAD program. I don't believe those are out yet, and there's been some criticism about how accurate they are. And then Barry, you could also check in with your city and see if the city has done any work. If there's not a lot out there, you can look at starting your own survey to just ask community members if they have broadband in their home, if they have devices, and what types of things they want to learn. And then if you have a state broadband office, that's another place that might be able to provide you some information, which I think all 50 states applied for BEAD, so everybody should have a broadband office.
I'm a little bit curious, you know, if you all have one-on-one appointments at your library, already, or if you're looking to start, I'm just going to launch a quick poll just to see kind of where, next steps to kind of see what direction everyone's heading. So I'm just going to launch a quick poll to see. Okay, so some libraries, looks like some libraries already have programs in place and some are looking to start. That's great.
That is
And so
great.
you mentioned the main resource probably the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, would you say, or are there others that for folks looking to start?
Yeah, I would look at the toolkit that we published with the National Digital Inclusion Alliance.
Yeah.
It goes into more detail, the topics that I've touched on. And then for those looking to start, and for those of you already doing one-on-one appointments, I would maybe look at if your staff are knowledgeable about free and low-cost internet and device options in your area, and sharing those resources. They change a lot, so.
Great. Are there any other questions? You can drop them in the chat or unmute. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Shauna, for your presentation. I know I certainly learned a lot, and I know folks will both appreciate in this session, and also from the recording, they'll get a lot of valuable information. So thank you so much for presenting today.
Yeah, thank you. It was my pleasure.